All right, hey everybody. So this is Josh Bruce, and today we're going to be looking at the second part of our reMarkable journey. So the first part really looked at customer experience from the perspective of the onboarding process, right? How do you go from being completely oblivious and having no information whatsoever up until the unboxing? This one, part two, is going to basically be focusing on the actual hardware itself. So we've got our stylus, we've got our tablet, and yeah. So going into the likes, I really like how light this is. Like, I cannot begin to describe how much I appreciate how light this is. From the analog side, it's about the same weight as a composition book. From the digital side, it's about the same weight as an iPad mini. So really light. I really feel like I can grab this and get a really good grip on it. And I'm not afraid that it's going to fall out of my hands. So I really, really appreciate that. And I also, I put it under my arm and it doesn't slide out like the iPads that I've had in the past used to do. It is a relatively decent size. It's not, it's not a full page of, or a full piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. But at the same time, it does give me a pretty nice sketching surface. It does allow me to write with my to-do list stuff. It allows me to create entries that are long enough for me to jog my memory, right? Because that's what we're replacing in my world, is something that does rapid capture and recall. One of the interesting aspects, and I could be wrong, so let me just double check. Yeah. One of the things I find interesting about the device is that we have the same bezels on both sides, but the top bezel is actually shorter than the bottom bezel. And we'll talk more about the bezels when we get to our Redux. With that said, the screen is, it does meet, so there's not like a bump, which you do get with a lot of e-ink devices like the Kindle, for example. I've seen a lot of Kindles, and even the Sony e-reader had like a lip. But when you consider how you're going to be holding the device, it kind of makes sense. Aluminum on the back. I'm assuming that part of this is actually the benefit of heatsink. I could be wrong, but there's also these two rubber strips that I appreciate a great deal. And when we talk about it from the top down, we'll get into that. I mentioned this in the first video. The buttons are actually flush to the device, which is also a respectable move. Beyond that, the power button being at the top in the middle, it's okay, but it's right because they didn't choose a side. Like, I think the iPads are on the right side, so they didn't choose a side, which is fine, right? Because it basically says, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, we're not favoring one of those. At the same time, it is not flush to the top, which, given the care of making this all flush here, and then even in the box, right? Like we talked about that in part one, where everything is just sort of flush against that foam insert. This just seems to be like, why are you sticking out? And the charging port is in the middle on the bottom, or what would traditionally be the bottom, or one of the sides, so you're not having to deal with any weight sort of dragging you down. So yeah, I really appreciate it. The plastic on the outside obviously helps with, well, obviously, I think it would also help with weight and keeping it relatively light. So, sorry, I think I just noticed that like it feels to be slightly heavier on the right side. I could be wrong, and anyway, I don't have equipment to check. So yeah, I was really impressed. I would have liked to have seen it in different colors, but I've also sort of grown accustomed to the idea of electronic devices being different colors. And this is still the first generation of the hardware. And when we get to the top down and start drawing and looking at things, you might notice that I still have the dead pixels because I haven't actually returned it yet. I wanted to shoot part 1 and part 2 before I had sent it back to go through whatever they're going to do to get me to solve that dead pixel problem. Because I also am still waiting for the 2.0 software update for the operating system. So this runs something they call Codex, which is on a Linux base and is developed specifically to work with e-ink displays. And so they released, oddly enough, or funny enough, and I'm not trying to stall, I swear. Funny enough, what ended up happening is I basically bought the device, got the device, and about 2 days later, reMarkable, they dropped their video about the 2.0 operating system. And then I think within like 12 or 13 hours, the gentleman that I linked to from the first part, and I'm going to put a link in here as well, added to his playlist about the OS 2.0 update. And I was like, oh wow, when does this happen? And that's when I found out it's on a rolling release and so on and so forth. And my device still hasn't been selected for the rolling release. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and switch to the top down view and really kind of take a closer look at this. All right, so we've got our reMarkable, and just to kind of flow in from the last little bit, let's go ahead and take a look at that iPhone thing. So this is my iPhone. Now let's pretend that this was a tablet of some sort, and I'm rolling my fingers around, but my fingers are a little bit sticky right now. They're kind of dry, and basically you can end up shifting it, especially with if you're actually trying to write on the iPad, because your wrist is gonna like hit it, and if you have no friction caused by the glass on the camera, like this thing becomes like an air hockey puck. It's a little ridiculous. And the same thing happens with notebooks, to be fair, right? Like if you had a notebook and you start writing, especially with a ballpoint pen, like it's going to cause problems. So the 2 rubber strips that I talked about that are on the back of this thing, right? Those things are a godsend for me, because basically I can do this all day long and nothing happens. It doesn't move, right? And not only that, because the hardware is designed to take 2 types of input, right? There's the touch input, and then there's the marking input, right? And the marking input is reserved for the marker, which we'll talk about here in a second. Whereas the touch input is any type of pressure. It's a touch screen. So it has nothing to do with your actual fingers being input devices. And so if I go ahead and bring it out of sleep mode, and I've already got a piece of grid paper up, I don't have to worry about my fingers accidentally marking up the screen, which is something that I get if I do something like notes on my phone. Give me 2 seconds on my phone, and I say that I want to use the pen tools, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, this is nice, and it's got a decent amount. It's not high latency, but at the same time, if this is an iPad, I can still kind of mark it up with just different parts of my wrist. And even like sometimes I'll use my pinky to sort of raise me up a bit, and yeah, down here that was empty. It's just not cool. And we talk about wrist rejection software, and I just haven't found one that actually works. So I don't have that problem here, right? Like, so there's my pinky, and that's because the device is set up to sort of divide things up. You have touch, right? And it's either or, so it can be my finger or it can be the pen. But when it comes to marking the page, it has to be the pen. And not only that, but one of the things going into the marker is the nibs. They do wear out over time. They are some type of carbon type of deal. But I was concerned that basically I went through one pretty quickly, and I was like, why is that happening? And what I determined is that, especially since my hand was kind of cramping up because I think I was writing more, is that I'm treating this, or was treating this, like back in the day when I used to play video games. Like, I would watch my friends like just grip the controller for my consoles, and their fingers are pushed all the way down and changing color, and I'm like, you do realize that it doesn't matter how hard you push the button, right? The button's either on or off. It doesn't have a pressure sensitivity to it. And same thing is true with the remote, but for some reason we're constantly like, oh, let me push harder. And sometimes, at least with remotes, sometimes it is that it doesn't make contact. We don't have this problem here. So the Wacom tablet technology, or the Wacom stylus technology, it doesn't, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Basically, all it needs is enough pressure to register that contact is made. Because the screen itself is actually sending a signal up to the pen instead of the pen sending a signal to the device, right? So with the Apple Pencil and things like that, like, you actually have Bluetooth, it's connected, and it's sending a signal. So that's not how this works. And so you can see where like some of these lines have skipped. That's where I actually hit the 0 point of the pressure on the pen. Yeah, you don't need to push very hard, because basically, I don't want to get too far into the software, but with the pens, or with the markers, the different things that make marks, basically you have fixed color, which is what this is. The fine liner is a fixed color. And then you'll have variable width based off of the tilt. And then you'll have variable color, like tone, based off of pressure. So, and we'll get into that when we talk about the software. So that's kind of what's up with the pen. I do appreciate that they've included, one of these, one of the nibs actually in the barrel for us, and the fact that there's a drawer is actually pretty interesting. And if you wait until the tip is actually sort of degraded, it's pretty easy to remove by hand. With a new tip, it's a little bit difficult, and using that tool or a pair of like needle nose pliers or something would be easier. Yeah, I think that's it. So what do I not like about the design? So I wish it was available in more colors. I think I've kind of gotten used to the idea of devices coming in multiple colors. It would be nice if the aluminum back here was sort of an anodized aluminum, so that it actually matched the device, because it's kind of weird having this really white device and then this gray piece of aluminum. But going back to constraints of physical product development specifically, I don't know if we're using an OEM solution, right? Where basically like Alibaba or AliExpress, where they already have the machining and the tooling to build this thing. And we can tweak a couple of things and have it be relatively inexpensive. Or if they're actually going the Apple route, which is to create a lot of your own tooling, I would think that as a new company, they're probably not going that route, right? They're basically really focusing more on software. So the idea is create hardware that can handle the software and carry it for a good few years before messing with the hardware. And that's kind of where we come in. So that's sort of our footprint, right? And like I said, I do appreciate that footprint. I would like to kind of stick with that. Am I using the right tool? No. So now, so that's the outside. Again, I think the screen resolution, or the screen size, is also very good. So we're going to go ahead and make these outside bezels. So this is our device, right? Um, Now, here's one of the things, a couple of things that I've noticed. One is these buttons at the bottom, they feel weird anyway, but they also, um, sometimes you can think you pushed it and you really didn't. Um, it's really kind of strange, right? So like right there, I think I pushed it. Okay, apparently I did. But I have thought that I pushed them and nothing happens, right? And that's actually a motif kind of with the device itself. One of the other issues is that because they have this large surface area, it's very easy to sort of be like, at least for me, to be kind of lazy and hit right here with this bone, and you end up hitting the back and the forward button. Now, if you are making a mark at the time, they did the right thing here. It's completely locked while I'm making a mark, but as soon as I stop making a mark, it becomes active again. Um, so the fact that they're kind of there and I can sort of, as I'm working across the device, I can end up pushing them. That's not very cool. Now the other thing is that because this is not a popular device yet, we don't have a lot of creators and resellers of say folios and sleeves for this thing. So completely understandable. With that said, that means that we're looking at universal folios. In fact, I would like to have a folio, not the sleeve, if I can find one that I appreciate. Because beyond that, I want to use the device in the raw as much as I can. Right? That's why I don't have a case on my phone. So with the universals, basically you get these loops that come over the corners, and unfortunately these buttons are so big and they're so spread out here that essentially those universal rubber things or latex things end up covering up parts of the button. So what I would like to see is I think we could actually do something like this, where basically, ooh, you didn't get the whole thing. There we go. If we just bring the buttons in a little bit, oh, I already have that selected. If we just bring those buttons in a skosh, right? Really? Right, now we kind of account for both problems. So if they were right here, they're still within thumb distance, so I can still get to them. At the same time, they should be far enough off center that I don't have to. Now, here's one of the interesting things, because remember, one of the things that we're doing with a lot of the remodeling stuff or the Redux, is we're taking more of an inspiration from the analog world, right? Because we are, so what did we use last time? It was alternative milks, right? So it's not that we're liquefied nuts, it's that we're milk made out of something else with a different source. Same thing with this. It's not that we are not a tablet limited in its functionality. We are paper that's expanded in its functionality. So let's do more nods to paper, not tablets, which is what this 3-button configuration down at the bottom usually reads to me. So what I would like to do is basically take a look at two other things that we see a lot in the paper world. One being the clipboard, and the other one being something like a legal pad or steno book. So the major thing for me, at least to pay attention to, is the hardware is up at the top to give a real like plain canvas to the rest of this. To the best of my knowledge, there is no written language that starts from the bottom and goes up. And it kind of makes sense given the way that we humans normally write. Going upwards would just kind of feel weird with the tools that we use. With that said, it's just, I mean, there's languages like, English, for example, is a good example of a left to right language. Arabic, and I think even Hebrew, I think. Really good examples of right to left languages where like the first letter in a sentence would start here and it would go left or it'd go right to the left. There are certain other Asian, like in China and Japan, I think, where basically you're actually going from the top down and then left to right instead of, or, top down and then right to left. So basically, yeah, top down is always there, right? English, top down, left to right. Arabic, top down, right to left. Again, I don't know the actual languages that do this, but then we have some Asian languages that are Far East Asia languages that go top down, left to right, and then top down, right. Like that's what we're talking about here. Whereas with the reMarkable, it's a tablet. All this stuff is down at the bottom, and it would be great if you were writing up or something. So, but anyway, looking at the clipboard, we basically have the hardware's up here, right? This is the place where you go semi-regularly compared to the primary function of the device, right? And not only that, but you can actually, I hope you can pick this up on camera. Let's see if we can get the lighting. There it is. So you can see right here, there's sort of a bump, and there's one over here too. That's because there's actually a staple in here, right? So all the pages are glued like one of those loose leaf notebooks that we talked about over on Eightfold Media when we talked about in Productivity 2. And then it's stapled, and then you have this piece of tape to hold it together, and there's the back of the staples, right? So what if we did something like that? So let's put this over here. So what if we did something like that? Now, what I'm going to do with this first iteration is I'm going to presume that we have to maintain the same amount of bezels, the same amount of bezeling. Is that even a word? I doubt it. And basically the idea is that there chances are there's hardware underneath here. Could be electrical runs or any other wiring or something, right? Something is underneath the bezels, and that's why they're there. And that's why they're big, right? Big. Air quotes. I am not. I don't care how big the bezels are, to be honest. And I care how big the display is. The bezels are not distracting to me, at least. So what I want to do is I want to convert this bottom bezel to being a 2 wide bezel, and then move the rest of the bezel and the buttons up to the top. Okay. So 1, 2, oops. So now we have a really big bezel, but we can play it off because clipboard. Yeah. So now, right, and let's go ahead and put our handy dandy charger thing here, right? Worst drawing of a USB mini ever. There we go. All right, so now with the buttons at the top, I can just use this freely, right? And I still have the 3 sides to basically hold it however I want to, and not necessarily have to worry about accidentally hitting these with my wrist because there's nothing to hit. They're gone. So now let's go ahead and get rid of these big old buttons. All right, so if we make that 3 wide. No, that's too big. Let's go ahead and do 1. So we're going to do it really narrow, so it'll be more like the power button. And then we're going to go ahead and make these into more of pill-shaped buttons. And we'll go ahead and get rid of that. Get rid of that. Oops. Go ahead and duplicate. I'm actually going to put them a little bit higher, and we'll get to why here in a minute. But yeah, so very little changing, and now we have something more akin to a clipboard. So one of the things that I will say that I'm torn on is this notion of the showing and hiding of the tools, and since I have seen the 2.0 release, even though I don't have it, the concept is still there, that basically there's part of the UI that you actually hit to make the tools show and appear, or show and hide. And the sort of part of the issue is like if I'm actually up here in this corner and I'm drawing, and let's say I'm doing a stippling or something, I'm just constantly hitting that thing over and over again. And I also can't see behind it. Basically, to do that, what I'd have to do is go switch it through accessibility to go to the left side of the screen, so that it would be gone. So what I actually like to do is, we forgot our handy dandy power button. I'd actually like to move or create a new button. Make it a circular shape instead of the pill shape to differentiate it. And it also ends up looking, again, going back to nods, right? So there's these little hooks for you to put clipboards up on a wall, and most clipboards have that. So again, it's kind of a nod to our analog ancestry. And I would also, just for being able to do things by touch, I would actually also like to be able to have this button in particular be more of a dip. So it's not flush, right? So basically all these buttons are flush, but this one here is a little bit different. And there's a reason for all of that. So let's go ahead and create a new layer, because now we're going to be sketching things out, or describing things, I should say. Let's go ahead and use gray. Okay. So here, I need a thicker line. That gray does not show up at all. There we go. So here, this is basically charging, right? And then what I want to do here is I think we're going to have 2 or 3 states for every one of these buttons. So this button is previous, right? And that's if you, we'll just call this click. So if you click this, that's previous, good to go. This button, on the other hand, if you click it, it's next or new, right? So if we're at the end of a notebook, it'll create a new page, kind of like we created this page, and now we've created another page, but you can't really tell. So let's go ahead and do a real demo of that. Oh, it looks like we didn't. We did the accidental button press. So let's go ahead and confirm that, right? So let's go back to our page, and now we're going to hit next. And now if we go back and look at our grid, we have a new page, right? So next or new, that's what the clicking does. Okay, so now we're starting to get into the fun ones. So this, should I go down? Yeah, let's go ahead and go down. So this button, if you click it, right, it's the equivalent of this button here. If you click that, that's only the home button. That is all this button does. Not that that's a problem, but it's one of the reasons that we can get away with, air quotes, what I'm about to suggest. So this, when we do click, it's show, hide, tools. So now this little button stops being part of the UI. Now it's interesting from the perspective that, again, it's kind of a nod to the writing, because it kind of feels like you're going and dipping yourself into a fountain pen and that sort of a thing. But yeah, it's not as cool as I would like it to be, I guess. So now if I were to hold this down for 3 seconds, right? Why not have it go to the first page in the notebook? Right, because we already have this concept of hold the button down with the power button, just like with a tablet. Again, this is stuff we're getting from the tablet world instead of stuff we're getting from the analog world, because there is no equivalent in the analog world. But hold it down for 3 seconds and you can turn off the device. So same thing over here. On the next button, if we hold it down for 3 seconds, go to the last page in a notebook. So that's a thing. Now, one of the things that you can do is, if we're here, like, let's go back one. So this is our drawing of the or at least an iteration of the drawing of the box. But if we click this button here, or tap this button here, basically what's going to end up happening is it's going to create a new page. But it creates the new page after that page. And I actually think that's a really great idea, because I have one of the videos from that gentleman I mentioned. We deleted a page we didn't want to. But one of the videos from the gentleman that I mentioned talked about, wanting the ability to add new pages, like just insert pages randomly, and you totally can do that. And I think we could also get away with, air quotes, do it here by way of a double click. So we'll just call this insert. And so basically it kind of, again, goes kind of into a nod of the tablet world, because if I hit this SleepWake button once, it's going to show me my lock screen. Now if I hit that SleepWake button 5 times, it's going to call emergency services. If I unlock the device and I don't have to tap it, right? Like, I don't actually have to click. I can just touch it twice. I get this assist for the UI because the iPhone is so freaking big. See Eightfold Media Productivity 2.1. And then if I press and hold, I go back home. If I press and hold the home button, I get Siri, right? So the idea of buttons having multiple functions is not new, right? So it should not be that far of a stretch for everybody involved. So for this, what I would actually like to do is keep the click for home. Let's consider a double to do SleepWake, or rather sleep, right? So this would be home/wake. This would be sleep if I double. So if I double tap that button, it puts the device to sleep. If I do the 3-second hold, which I think it's a 6-second now, it brings off the shutdown screen. So now, with all that functionality wrapped up in that one position, ooh, let's actually do this. Let's go here, here, go to our clear. Still have the largest, yes we do. Let's switch layers. Oh, we don't need to. Damn it. I made that layer and haven't even used it. So let's go ahead and just erase using clear ink. So now we no longer have that button that's jutting out of the top, right? All the buttons are right here. They're localized into this one spot. And with that said, in theory, right, in theory, because we don't have any cracks, right, not a lot of open seams except whatever the aluminum plating has, it might actually be interesting to start considering something like water resistance. Not necessarily waterproof, but at least enough for me to use it in the shower, if that's possible, because I think it would be possible given that I can still touch the screen and the screen should still be able to tell the pen or send a signal to the pen and back again. I mean, I'm not sure. Like, this is not, these specific technologies are not my thing, so, or my wheelhouse. So, whoa. See what I mean? Accidentally hitting buttons. Quick sheets. All right. So now, what I'd like to see here is I would like to be able to register a default pen, right? So basically for me, for example, when I use the device most often, it's going to be the fine liner. It's probably going to be the midpoint, and it's going to be in black. And while I appreciate the idea, trying to think how to put this. I appreciate the ability or the functionality that the device has where every notebook I go into, it remembers the last pen I was on. But sometimes I go into a notebook and I would like to get away from whatever tool I was using, whatever that happens to be, and just go back to using my pen or a default pen. And I made some notes in a different notebook. I just want to make sure that I'm doing this correctly. Yeah. So, all right, so if I do a double click, that would be my default marker. Oops. I don't know why I'm going to erase this, but I'm going to erase this. So double goes to default. And one of the things that I've seen with other e-ink tablets and commentary with regard to reMarkable in particular is that there's no way for the user to refresh the screen. And that would be nice considering in order to basically not have to wait for the device to do the whole thing itself, right? If I wanted to. But again, also, well, not again, but talking about concepts like poke-yoke, which is inadvertent error, inadvertent error prevention or something, or the way that I tend to put it is basically make things you want people to do easy, make things you don't want people to do difficult. And so what I'd like to see, or what I think we could do, is basically have the whole 3-second hold thing here and let that be a refresh. So it's not something where somebody's going to inadvertently refresh their screen over and over again and go, why is my battery life not what it used to be? Instead, we're basically giving quick access. So click previous, click next, click show hide tools, right? And now with it being an actual hardware button, in the middle, you still have that movement of coming up here, but the tools will end up like you wouldn't accidentally do that, right? Like I didn't mean to open up the tools. I also didn't mean to close them either, right? Like there's just so many times when I accidentally hit this thing that it's ridiculous. And then part of why I'm also there is that there's also times where I'm holding the device like this and I accidentally sort of hit with the web of my thumb, the undo, to the point that I thought for a minute there that I was actually like the device was going crazy and was actually deleting stuff I was writing as I was writing it. And so moving all that away, right? Just take the touch and yeah, just put it up here, basically. So click, 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 real easy access to things, jumping to the first page, jumping to the last page, being able to shut down the device from the button up here with a 3-second hold, being able to refresh the screen with a 3-second hold, right? So because it does seem like shutting down the screen is something we don't really need to do and don't really want people to do necessarily. So putting it under the hold pattern, I think, will be fine. Then with regard to double taps, this does mean that there would be a slight delay when we depress the key. Like, so when I hit that key, it goes immediately. It's not, there's no thinking about it whatsoever. It just goes home. I don't even have to release the button, right? So there is this notion that if I hit the button and I let go, like if I hit the button, nothing's going to happen for a second, right? Like I have to let go before it responds. And then there would be like a delay, right? So that way I could hit it twice. So there is that to consider. Then double tapping. So being able to insert a page, like I'm in a lecture, for example, and I'm taking notes and I'm taking notes and I'm taking notes and I'm like, oh, I just remembered this thing. I can quickly just double tap the previous button and it inserts a page, but it's inserted before the page that I'm just on. So if I hit next, I go to that page, right? And the same deal with next, with its double tap of being able to insert a page next to it. Double tap to put it to sleep, so I can just come up here and go sleep. Whereas where this button is and its level of sensitivity, its size, so on and so forth, I have gone to put it to sleep and it did not go to sleep. So putting it there, making it the double tap, and giving me that real tactile feedback that I did actually push the button is going to be, I think, nice. And then being able to just double tap our sort of toolkit button and have it go to a default pen for me, I think would be interesting. And it's possible that could be multiple things, right? So thinking Siri quick actions, for example, to go back to the Apple stuff. Okay, so now here's where it gets interesting again. With 2.0, we introduced gestures, right, to be able to turn the pages, to go left and right. So it could also be possible that we actually get rid of the left and right buttons in the second generation of the hardware, leaving us with just these two, um, which could also be nice. And it may also be nice if we, or at least interesting, if we actually made this circular button what used to be the next and the previous. And so that way, whether I'm left-handed or right-handed, or if I go up to the screen, with whatever hand, or even using, holding it down and going at it this way, that's why it's in the middle in the first place. But, putting it somewhere where I can actually physically reach it pretty easily is an interesting concept. And trying to think. For now, I think that's kind of it. All right, so there you have it. That's kind of what I would like to see in reMarkable Hardware 2.0. Um, Again, just mainly more nods to the paper side of the house, less nods to the digital side of the house. With that said, like we talked about, I don't know how much of this is just straight up rebranded OEM, which, if you don't know, basically there are manufacturers who have tooling and dies and everything already manufactured. Like Alibaba Express is probably the most well known. But basically, you go in there and you basically can choose a device, and then you can modify it in certain ways, and you pay extra for those modifications. And yeah, if you don't make any modifications, then you don't pay as much. So if this is straight off the shelf, which it kind of looks like it is, then I think reMarkable is definitely putting their money into the proper place, right? Because right now they need to make sure, at least from my perspective, they need to make sure that the software is working, because the software is what's going to carry them, and the software is what's going to differentiate them from their competition. The fact that it doesn't run just an Android install on e-ink paper is huge in my book. The low latency, just all these things that are more hardware related than or software related than they are hardware related. So anyway, with that said, I think this is a wonderful device. It does work. SleepWake, power, forward, back, home. It gets the job done. I really like those rubber feet. Please don't get rid of those rubber feet. So anyway, with that said, as always, thank you so much for making the time. I definitely do appreciate it, and I'll see you around.